Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Jim Benson, author of Personal Kanban. Did I pronounce that correctly, Jim?
You got it just fine.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you, and I always like to say Happy Friday because we're recording this on a Friday. It's always a nice way to end the week.
It is. It's a gorgeous day here, so.
I wish I could say this thing. We've had storms in Texas the last couple of days. But on the bright side, we haven't had 100-degree temperatures, so that's been a nice balance with it.
There's always a silver lining.
Oh, yeah. Are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
The best experiences I've had in writing any of our books has been having someone to write with. Right now, one of my colleagues, Corey Lattis, is writing his second book, and he's doing it in a collaborative system online, and he will write, paragraphs or a chapter, and I will check in and just comment. And when Tony Ann and I, my co-author Tony Ann DiMaria, and I wrote Personal Kanban, we literally wrote every page of it in Google Docs, and we collaborated across the country. But it was all collaboration, and it tightened up the writing, it made editing go faster, and it just made sure that your narratives were understandable by other people and not just me, or not just you.
Well, you mentioned a very innovative strategy. So when you're actually creating a book, you did it in Google Docs. You would actually take a turn of writing some of the content, and then you would basically have one of your partners go in there and basically go through it, make sure everything made sense. I mean, what was the process with that? Well,
so with the Personal Kanban book, the process was actually Tony Ann and I were writing in Google Docs at the same time, often in the same paragraph. So it was very unique. It was like music. So it was like we were just improvising, like improvisational jazz. So we would write all day long. So when we wrote Personal Kanban, we were all in. So we wrote all day, almost every day for about 8 months. And it was very intense, but that high level of collaboration, like I said, meant that, when we write or when we tell any stories, we know all the backstory and we know all the things that we're not saying. And so we assume that other people see the same information in what we're writing as we do.
Yeah, that's a very unique approach to actually do it in Google Docs. And for those that aren't too familiar with Google Docs, the nice thing is you are literally doing it in real time. So whatever you're typing out there, that within seconds is what's coming available. So you can have someone else, as long as they're connected to Google. Yeah, it's amazing, that process. So it's a very unique method, and the most important thing is it seems to have worked well for you, and especially being under a co-author type of format, because that's not always the best fit. So you definitely found a way to make it work.
Right, and I mean, we've all read books by co-authors where you can say, aha, that person wrote that chapter and that other person wrote that other chapter. But because we were writing all of the paragraphs at the same time together, we found our joint voice, which was different than my voice or her voice, interspersed.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Finishing things. I haven't met an author that doesn't have 12 books in their heads, and I think one of the hardest things to do is to say, right now I'm writing this book, or right now I'm writing this piece of work, or right now I'm writing this chapter, and there is a narrative in that chapter that needs to be told specifically, and your brain is always wanting to bring in all of this other detail. And that for me has been one of the hardest things. It's just, what is the right amount of detail to tell the right story at the right time?
Yeah, my philosophy has always been with that, with my books, is I'm going to get this book done and all these great ideas and great concepts, I'll just turn those into future books. And that was what I was
Hmm.
able to do with that content creation. But you're right. It's just you get done with it and you're thinking, oh man, I could add all these different things to add to it, or I have this idea. And then you just got to realize, okay, hold up, I can use these on future books and even for potential second editions of the current book that I'm working on.
Exactly. It was when I got married. We had our wedding on a boat, and some of the hors d'oeuvres didn't make it. And for years, when we would talk about the wedding, which was gorgeous, my wife would mention that those couple of hors d'oeuvres didn't show up. So she knew exactly what was left out, but everybody else was paying attention to what was there.
That's funny. So every time you're thinking that wedding, you're thinking about those hors d'oeuvres that just didn't make it.
Yeah, yeah. And every time I look at any of our books, I think, I could have stuck this chapter in, or I could have stuck that thing in. So I
Yeah.
guess the second most important thing, or second hardest thing, is just knowing not necessarily when you're done, but when the book is done,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll never be done.
In many of the episodes that we've had with the show, I always talk about one simple phrase, and that is done is better than perfect. It's never going to be perfect.
Yes, or published is better than perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Just get it out there and save the rest of the content for future books. So let's talk
Yep.
about the funnest part about this, of course, the marketing phase. So please share a
Oh, who
marketing.
doesn't love that?
Oh, I know, right? But please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
Okay, so this is one of the things about personal Kanban that is lucky for us, which is that personal Kanban, the book, is all about a way of better managing projects, better managing your daily work, and figuring out how to get stuff done for real. And we were lucky enough to come up with an idea that was novel enough that it kind of sold itself. But for me personally, the thing that worked the most for me is just to get out and talk about it. So when you're starting anything like this, there are professional get-togethers or get-togethers in your city, meetups that deal with the subject at hand. You find that you're talking to groups of 25 people initially, and then they become groups of 100 people, and then they become groups of 1,200 people, and so on. So using our book, using personal Kanban as the means, I basically went on, I don't know, a 5-year speaking tour, which after the first year became revenue generating in its own right. So, starting doing keynotes and then being paid for the keynotes. The I'm trying to figure out just really quickly, because I know that that's really specific, for me, and that everybody can't do that. So I'm trying to think of something a little bit more general. And the more general thing that we did was we just leveraged social media, and not social media in the pushed or paid advertising realm, but social media in finding out who was already buying the book and engaging them in conversations as often as possible. So at the very beginning, like 8 years ago when the book first came out, every single day we were engaging people around the world in conversations about how they were using the techniques in the book, and then what they got out of the book. And I found that people are extremely forthcoming about things when they enjoy it.
Well, how did you find the people that bought your book? Because Amazon is not going to release that information. So were you getting people to opt in to different offers to build your list, or were they subscribing to your social media? How did they connect with you initially?
So the book says, that we're our founder and Sprezzatura on Twitter, which at that time, was Twitter was growing, and beyond that, we were riding kind of two professional waves. So there's or three, I guess. So one is just merely, if I can use the word that I don't like, the productivity wave. We don't think of our tool as a productivity tool, but people use it like that. Then there's the lean wave in just general business, and then agile methods in software development. And all of those groups, in one way or another, kind of claimed personal Kanban as their own, which introduced us to huge populations of people that were predisposed to buy a book like this. But you're right; it's a huge problem that Facebook, but that Amazon won't report back to you who, even generalized, even anonymized, who or what types of people or what the demographics of the people are that are actually buying the book. And so what I know now is that when people call us for consulting, like let's say we'll get a call from Stuttgart, and they'll say, hey, we've been using personal Kanban now for 6 years, and we think it's time that you guys came in and worked with us. And we had no idea that they were using personal Kanban, and we would if Amazon would just let us know where people were. So the only people that we know are people who had come back to the personal Kanban site and signed up for the mailing list, or people who come to Twitter, but they have to act. We have no way of mining that data at present. And so like with the personal Kanban book now, it's, if you will, self-published. We started our own publishing company, but self-published. We've recently had talks with major publishers about what to do about the next one, because the book is sold extremely well. And we found out that publishers won't give us that information either. So no one seems to be very invested in finding, and providing us the data that we need to sell the book.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is, just mainly building it through back-end offers. Now people tend to email. The other option you can do is obviously put pixels in your website and pixels in your landing pages. That helps track it a little bit, but you're right, it's not a perfect science. And it's going to help when if you plug in, obviously, Google Analytics, those type of things, which I'm sure you're already doing. So you can find some of that information, but you're right. I mean, that's one of the challenges, and that's why I always recommend people, when you do have your book out there, have as many different offers as possible in that book available, so you can get their email information, so you can make that more personal connection. Because you're right, that's one of the best things, is to have those people reach out to you, especially with this amazing book that you have, where you've got all these, whether you liked it or not, all these productivity people really connecting to that, and then you're able to build a business of that. So one thing I would like to touch on, you mentioned the Meetup strategy. Could you tell me a little bit about that and how that worked?
Sure. So there's the easiest one to find is meetup.com. But in all cities around the world, there are, just small gatherings of people who are interested in stuff.
Yep.
And so whatever your book is about, there's someone out there or there's groups of people out there that are interested in that particular stuff. And what I found is that I'll put it this way. I'll put it in the publishing context. All of those groups are really anxious for content,
yes.
And you are the content. So if you contact them ahead of time and say, "Hey, I wrote this book, and I'm going to come to your meetup," and not make it like I'm invading your meetup to sell my stuff, but we're all interested in this, and life is a conversation. So, I can't wait to come and meet everybody and just talk about topic. And what will generally happen is that when you arrive, they'll be like, "Hey, author person is here. Would you tell us about your book?" So don't lead with, "I'm going to invade you and talk to you about my book, and I'm going to come with a box of them to sell." but show up as a community member that just happens to have taken the time to put your thoughts down on paper. And they will appreciate you without you having to push.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I was at my Rotary Club this morning, and our club is actually called Arlington Sunrise, which means we actually meet at 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's bright and early, but you got great energy. But the reason I mention this is I was talking to a couple of guys after the meeting. We're talking about publishing, and I was talking about sales approaches. And the main thing I was telling them is like the hard sell, which I've always been against, it just doesn't work anymore. What works is storytelling and making that connection. And it's the same approach with this, where you're like, hey, I'd love to come meet up, talk to you guys, talk a little bit about this journey. But then what's the funny thing that happens after that? Well, wow, we'd really like to have a copy of your book, or, I'm looking to get a book published. Could you help me with it? And just doing it with that approach, it's going to work. But just go in there with giving the value and being supportive like you were doing. And then all these great things happen. I'm sure that's happened with your meetups as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so one of my rules about giving a keynote is that the keynotes cannot be about personal Kanban. they generally also can't be about the things that are about personal Kanban, which is like visualizing your work, limiting your work in progress, sharing your work with other people. But it can be stories and narratives about people engaged in whatever work they're engaged in, and what happened to them when they acted intentionally in whatever way that they did. So to go in and provide relevance and context, as opposed to, as you put it, a strong sale. Hi, I'm here to convince you that personal Kanban is great, or whatever.
And that was your approach at the meetup. So you're just going to talk about this, going to share stories, and then everything else essentially took care of itself from there.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about it. Well, whatever the meetup happened to be about. So if it was a lean meetup, we'd go and we'd talk about lean, and maybe personal Kanban would be maybe personal Kanban would be relevant. Maybe it wouldn't, but we would just have the conversations and go forward. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. As I mentioned prior to the show, I'm all about the follow-up questions, and especially about marketing, because our listeners, they love to hear that. And you brought up so many innovative strategies where I really wanted to dig in a little bit. So I appreciate you sharing that, because you're the first one that's really mentioned in regards to our guests about meetups and utilizing that. And I feel that's such a great strategy, because they have meetups all over the place. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there's even an app these days that you can actually utilize for that as well, and different social media devices too.
Yep. Yeah. So that's what I was saying, is that if you use Meetup.com or the Meetup app, there's all sorts of things happening everywhere, and so we travel extensively for work, and so at the beginning, when we go to Washington D.C. or to wherever, and then we would land, we'd work in the day, and then we'd say what are things that are going on at night where we could stop by and meet people. And not only expand our network through the, quote unquote networking thing, but to have actual conversations with people who are interested in the stuff that we're interested in, so that we can learn and expand our horizons for future books.
And how many meetups did you end up going to when you guys were doing the book?
I couldn't begin to count.
Just ballpark.
I would say easily hundreds.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that so every the one thing that was awesome for us, but that I feel guilty about in this particular context, is the content of our book was readily accepted by a global audience, which made all of these things very easy for us. We didn't have to, get in the car and drive from Seattle to Portland to San Francisco, and do a speaking circuit. We immediately had people saying, "Can you come in and work with us?" And then we would go in and work with them, and then we would be in that city, and we would get those things done. So we were blessed with an incredible crutch in this regard.
Well, it sounds like that also helps with some of the public speaking gigs as well, with building those up over time.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I believe we spent the last 10 minutes talking about marketing, but I absolutely loved digging in on that. But we're going to transition now a
Well,
little
good.
bit. I'd like to talk about your favorite book. And this is beyond with the marketing question, typically our toughest question. And that is, what is your favorite book? And what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Oh, and this is the question that I should, because this is like, what's your favorite kid, or
It's true.
what's your favorite Beatles song, or so I am probably going to say that my favorite book is going to end up being Vonnegut's Hocus Pocus.
Ah.
And part of the reason for that is, and I know it's got to be because it actually never leaves my desk, is when I read Hocus Pocus, I felt like I was reading someone who was unbelievably comfortable with who they were, what they were writing, what their voice was, and the story that they were telling. More so than almost any other writer, except for maybe, Alice Walker or maybe Murakami. But that book just blew me away with how thoughtfully Vonnegut treated the characters and the situations that they were in. It just felt like he really cared.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
So I think that my most often used quote is, if you can't state what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. It's by W. Edwards Deming. And it sounds mechanical. It is misleadingly mechanical. But the reality is that most of us are overloaded, we're overwhelmed, and we're often out of control of the things that we do from day to day. We do stuff that other people tell us to do, or we do stuff that we have to do right now because, there's some fire to put out. And the hidden wisdom in that quote is that if we slow down, take a little bit of time and say, what exactly am I doing? What are my goals, and how am I intending to get there? Which is, who am I going to get there with? What joy am I going to find at the end of that experience? That is our process. It's not, what forms do we fill out or what order do we do things, but it's, what is our mission, and how are we as professionals or humans going to achieve that? So it's a very long way of saying, if you can't state what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The easiest way to find me online is that I am Our Founder on Twitter, and always have been since the third week of Twitter existing.
Nice.
That's absolutely the easiest way to get to me. Otherwise, personalkanban.com, KANBAN.com, has ample ways of getting hold of both me and of my co-author and business partner, Tony Ann.
Well, Jim, again, thank you for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Well, thank you.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.